Through the mists of centuries, through the noise of the crowd on the Athenian square, through the whisper of ancient streets, a story reaches us that has stirred hearts and minds for more than 2,000 years. The story of a man who dared to challenge the very foundations of society. A man whose name has become a symbol of wisdom and unwavering faith in the truth, Socrates. But along with this name, there is another shadow, the shadow of poison, the shadow of a mysterious death that is still debated. We know this legend. An old philosopher, surrounded by his disciples, calmly takes a cup with a poisonous infusion of hemlock. He does not tremble, does not hesitate, does not try to run. He drinks slowly, like wine at a feast, and then lies down on the bed, has his last conversations about the immortality of the soul, and quietly leaves. Everything looks majestic and noble, like in a poem, like in a theatrical play. But was it really like that? Or is there a secret hidden behind this picture that the Athenians did not dare to reveal? After all, think about it. Socrates wasn't just an old philosopher. He was a thorn in the side of those in power. He asked questions that had no convenient answers. He confused the young, taught them to think and doubt. He denounced those who called themselves wise but spoke empty words. For some, he was the voice of truth. For others, a dangerous heretic. And when he was put on trial, his execution became inevitable. But what if there was more to this story? What if Socrates' death was not a voluntary step towards a philosophical ideal, but a carefully thought-out game in which reality mixed with legend? Judge for yourself. All the information about his last hours we received not from eyewitnesses, but from his students. But could the students write the truth? Could they show their teacher's weakness, doubts, or fear? It was much more profitable to create a legend about a sage who accepted death calmly, without tears, like a god descending from Olympus. And now the story of the poison becomes not just an episode, but a real myth, a myth about the triumph of the spirit over the flesh. But is it only a myth? Many scholars ask, did Socrates really drink poison? Or is the poison just an allegory, a symbol, a literary device created by Plato and Xenophon to elevate their teacher to the pedestal of eternity? After all, we know that history easily turns into myth when it is told by students, not enemies. And if Socrates' death is fiction, then what really happened that day? Athens in the 5th century BC was a city where politics and philosophy intertwined with mysticism and religion. The trial of Socrates was not only a legal process, but also a real ritual. He was accused of corrupting the youth and not honoring the gods. But were these just pretexts? Or was there a darker reason behind them? Perhaps Socrates knew too much, saw too keenly the vices of society, and the authorities decided to get rid of him, but in such a way that his death would seem voluntary and even sublime. Imagine a silent cell, students holding their breath, and an old man preparing for his final step. But what if, instead of a solemn acceptance of fate, there was a tragedy taking place there, hidden from prying eyes? What if Socrates did not want to die at all? What if he was forced to, and then the legend was rewritten so that his name remained a symbol of courage, not despair? But even if we accept the version that Socrates really drank the poison voluntarily, another question arises. What motivated him at that moment? Was it a gesture of philosophical fortitude or a cunning form of protest against injustice? When he raised the cup to his lips, he may have understood that his death would become a symbol, and symbols live longer than people. What is better, to live a few more years, forgotten and humiliated, or to leave so that your name will sound for centuries? For that is exactly what happened. The court documents of his execution disappeared, the details of the trial were lost, but the legend remained, and it was the legend that made him immortal. But what was the price of this legend? Perhaps Socrates himself became a hostage to the created image, a man who was forced to play the role of a sage, even in his own last moments. And here comes another mystique, hemlock poison. Why hemlock? Why did the Athenians choose this method of execution? Hemlock acts slowly, paralyzing the body, starting at the feet and moving upward until breathing stops. It is an agonizing death, But in Plato's descriptions, it seems almost painless, even beautiful. It is as if poison had been transformed from a weapon of execution into an instrument of philosophical ritual. But isn't it strange that the real agony has disappeared from the text? Did the disciples hide the most terrible truth in order to create a picture of a noble exit? Maybe the poison is not poison at all, but a metaphor for Socrates killing himself not with poison, but with loyalty to his own principles. What he showed by his departure: it is better to die than to give up the search for truth. But if this is so, then we are not dealing with reality, but with a theater staged by students who made an icon out of their teacher, not a man. And yet, amid these questions and doubts, one thought remains unshakable. Socrates' death was not an end, but a beginning. The beginning of a great philosophical tradition that has survived the ages. His passing raised more questions than answers. And that is the greatest mystery. Perhaps he did not want us to know the truth. Perhaps that was his final lesson. The truth is always hidden, to be sought, but never fully grasped. And when we speak today of the cup of poison, we are not really speaking of death, but of an eternal mystery, a mystery that makes history alive. After all, every era sees something of its own in Socrates. For some, he is a hero, for others, a victim, for others, a mystic who has stepped over the edge. But the truth, as always, eludes. And perhaps that is why Socrates remains eternal. When the name of Socrates is pronounced in the darkness of old libraries or in a whisper under the vaults of ancient temples, the air seems to become denser. His image has long ceased to be just the image of a philosopher. It has turned into a symbol of a mystery, covered in a 1,000-year fog. After all, the death of Socrates is not just an execution, not just a tragic page in the history of Athens, but an event that many researchers call a real mystery. A death that for centuries makes people wonder. Did he take poison as ordered? Or was there a secret plan, carefully hidden from the eyes of mere mortals? The trial of Socrates was an unusual event. He was accused of corrupting the youth and of not honoring the gods of the city. But what was hidden behind these words? Was this a sentence based solely on the laws of the polis? Or was this an ancient ritual carefully disguised as an official accusation? After all, Athens was a place where faith, politics, and secret societies intertwined into a single pattern. Imagine a courtroom filled with the voices of citizens, a noise like the roar of the sea before a storm. Here, amid the anger and whispers, Socrates speaks words that sound as if he has long been prepared for his fate. He does not justify himself, does not beg for mercy. He seems to be in dialogue with something greater than the crowd of judges. His speech is cold, clear, and sharper than any sword. He himself chooses the punishment that the law is obliged to offer. Not exile, not silence, but death. Is this not the first riddle? Why did a man who had so many students, followers, friends not take advantage of the chance to escape? Why did he reject escape, reject life in exile, although it was possible? Here begins the mystical whisper of history. Some said that Socrates always sought to prove the power of his philosophy, to show that the soul is higher than the body, that truth is higher than the fear of death. Others claimed that he was initiated into secret knowledge, where death was understood not as an end, but as a transition, as an initiation into another world. His death seems theatrical, like an ancient ritual. Taking the cup of poison is a symbolic act, as if it were not just a punishment, but a sacred rite. The poison was perhaps not so much an instrument of execution as a key to a door into another reality. And Socrates, smiling, accepted this key as if he had long known where it led. But if this was so, who was behind it? Were the Athenian authorities in passing sentence merely pawns in the hands of more ancient and hidden forces? Or did the philosopher himself, foreseeing everything, orchestrate his own departure? Questions that haunt historians and researchers of mysteries to this day. Socrates always spoke of the soul as an eternal entity, not subject to time and death. For him, the body was just a temporary shell, and death was liberation. This is what makes his act even more mysterious. When others feared the end, he greeted it with a smile. But was he simply a philosopher convinced of his own rightness, or a man who had touched upon secret mystical teachings that allowed one to look beyond the edge? There is a theory that Socrates was connected with secret schools and fraternities where they studied the immortality of the soul and the path to purification of the spirit. For such societies, death was never considered the end. It was a test, a transition, a kind of initiation ritual. Perhaps his death was not an accident, but part of an ancient rite in which poison replaced the sacred drink. Let's look at the details. Plato in Phaedo describes the teacher's last hours. The atmosphere of this scene is strikingly unlike an execution. There is no horror, no fear. Even the students, although they are crying, listen to his reasoning about the immortality of the soul. Socrates conducts a philosophical dialogue at the moment when his body's already preparing to leave for eternity. Is this not a symbolic performance? It seems that this entire day was planned, like a play with a pre-written ending. In historical context, Athens at the time was full of intrigue and hidden conflicts. Political rivalries, religious traditions, and personal grudges intertwined to create a web in which any action could have deadly consequences. Socrates, with his fearless search for truth, inevitably became an irritant in this delicate balance. His questions about the nature of goodness, justice, and divine order upset the established norms. And the more clearly he spoke, the more the danger he posed was felt. So the execution of Socrates can be perceived not just as a legal procedure, but as a carefully planned action, where every step was thought out. The trial, the accusation, the cup of poison, everything looked public and legal, but inside there was a deep mystery. Why do the students, when talking about the last moments of the teacher's life, mention only calm and reflections on the soul? Why do they not describe fear, pain, or resistance? Perhaps they deliberately created the myth of the courageous philosopher in order to protect the true secret hidden from mere mortals. It is also interesting that the descriptions of his last day are always rich in symbolism. The cup of poison is not just a vessel with a dangerous liquid. It symbolizes transition, choice, and inevitability. The poison, slowly acting on the body, turns into an instrument of philosophical experience, where death becomes a lesson and a test. The many students who observed it perceived his departure as proof of his fortitude. But what was really happening behind the closed doors of the room? Another mystery is connected with the fact of the trial itself. In Athens, there was a law according to which the condemned could choose his punishment. Socrates, as if following a secret scheme, chooses death rather than exile. This choice seems logical from a philosophical point of view, but mystically it turns into an act that cannot be explained only rationally. Why this moment, this specific cup? Why these words and these students? All this creates an atmosphere of mystery that cannot be dispelled either by historical documents or by logic. And finally, there remains the question of the students' perception. Plato and Xenophon wrote about it years later. Their texts are not only a description of events, but also the creation of a symbol. They turn the teacher into a figure that is impossible not to believe in. The myth of a peaceful death and philosophical reasoning about the soul creates a unique image. A man who conquered death not with his body, but with his spirit. The mystery of Socrates is further enhanced by the fact that many of the events of that day have reached us only through retellings and legends. Different sources complement each other and sometimes contradict each other. But it is precisely this uncertainty that creates space for mysticism. We will never know the whole truth, and perhaps this was the philosopher's intention. He left us not only knowledge, but also a mystery that lives on for centuries. But if we delve even further, we begin to think of a mystery that even his disciples might not have solved. Perhaps Socrates knew something about the nature of life and death that we will never know. Perhaps his passing was part of an ancient practice in which death is merely a doorway to an understanding of the highest truth. And then his philosophy, his calm, and his reflections on the soul take on new meaning. He shows us the way through fear, through inevitability, through the mystery of death itself. Another aspect that intrigues researchers is the reaction of Athens after the execution. Despite the elimination of the inconvenient philosopher, his ideas did not disappear, but on the contrary, they spread. It is like a mystical paradox. The attempt to suppress the truth only strengthened it. Perhaps this was the hidden intention of Socrates or those who stood behind his fate, to ensure that death did not destroy the teaching, but gave it eternal power. And today we can only guess. Was Socrates prepared for death, as the legends claim, or was it a forced, carefully hidden event? Perhaps the poison was only a symbol, and the real death was the transition to a new dimension of understanding, where philosophy and mysticism merge. Perhaps Socrates left us not so much a teaching as a riddle that each seeker must solve for himself. We stand on the threshold of millennia, looking at his image. And the more we try to understand, the more questions arise. His words about the soul, about justice, about virtue are becoming relevant today. And with them remains the enduring mystery of his departure. A mystery that attracts, frightens, and delights at the same time. The death of Socrates remains the greatest mystery of antiquity, and this is its greatness. It teaches us to search, doubt, and believe in the power of the Spirit. Each generation of philosophers, historians, and mystics sees something of their own in this story. For some, Socrates is a hero who met death with dignity. For others, he is a symbol of secret wisdom who passed through the gates of an unknown world. For others, he is a riddle that cannot be solved, but which cannot be ignored. And this is the magic of history. It never gives final answers. It only guides, inspires, and awakens the desire to search. And here we have the image of an old Athenian standing in the shadow of the past, holding a cup of poison, his eyes full of knowledge that we may never know. This is the image of a man who turned death into a lesson and his passing into a legend. The mystery of his death remains unsolved, and perhaps this is where the greatest lesson lies. True wisdom lies not only in knowledge, but in the ability to see beyond the obvious, to perceive the hidden, and to live with the eternal question that cannot be closed. When we look at the story of Socrates at his last moments in Athens, we understand this is not just an execution, it is a lesson that has transcended centuries. His passing teaches us to understand that death may not be the end, but part of the path that a person takes in search of truth. He showed that courage and philosophical fortitude are not abstractions, but a real choice that a person makes in the face of the inevitable. We see an old man accepting a cup of poison, but behind that simple act lies a universe of meaning. Perhaps Socrates knew more than we are given to understand. Perhaps his passing was a secret ritual, prepared centuries before. Perhaps it was a carefully planned game in which we are merely witnessing a symbol, not a reality. His death continues to inspire because each time we return to the story, we discover new layers of its mystery. And this is precisely the magic of history. The mysteries of the past always beckon, call, and frighten at the same time. Socrates left us not just words about the soul and virtue, he left us a riddle that we try to solve again and again. He taught us to seek the truth, to doubt and accept the unknown. His death became an eternal symbol of the fact that philosophy is not just knowledge, but the ability to live with questions that cannot be closed. Today we can look at him and feel the same mystical power that was felt in Athens more than 2,000 years ago. We see a sage who accepted his fate with dignity, who showed his disciples and the world that the human spirit can overcome fear and death. The mystery of his passing remains alive because truth, like knowledge, is never final. And when we discuss Socrates, we are not only talking about philosophy and history, we are talking about the eternal riddle of human nature. What is truth? What is life? What is death? These questions that Socrates asked then remain relevant today. And that is why his story continues to excite minds and hearts, because it combines knowledge, mysticism, and eternal mystery. Each generation finds something of its own in this story. For some, Socrates is a symbol of courage and fortitude. For others, he is the image of a mysterious guide to the unknown. For others, he is a mystery that is impossible to solve, but also impossible to ignore. His death was not just an event, but a legend that continues to live in everyone who seeks the truth and asks questions. So however we interpret his passing, one thing remains constant. Socrates left us with a lesson about life and death, about finding meaning, and about embracing the unknown. His story reminds us that true wisdom lies not in the answers, but in the ability to ask questions, in the ability to look the unknown in the eye and move forward despite fear. If you want to continue to uncover the most mysterious secrets of history with me, subscribe to the channel, like and share your opinion in the comments. Together we can look into the past, discover hidden stories, and lift the curtain of secrets that ancient philosophers, rulers, and legends have kept for centuries.